Hey, let's talk about creating compositions, specifically being able to make better art through really well-designed compositions. I'm going to look to the masters for ideas on how to explain what I want to talk about. Specifically, I'm going to look at the art of Andrew Loomis. Andrew Loomis has a series of great books, such as, Creative Illustration, Figure Drawing for All It's Worth, a variety of really good books that he created back in the 40s and the 50s that are the best that I've found on explaining how to make art and how to make illustration, especially the kind that is effective and communicates really, really well. You really can't go much further than looking at these examples to find great information. And honestly, I think it's a little bit of a lost art. Sometimes I think in school today we miss out on some of these old lessons that the old timers knew, and I kind of want to rediscover them. So if you look at the pages of his book, he breaks down all the specific details and options that you have for composing your picture. Now, we take that for granted, maybe, or we just kind of ignore it, or we work intuitively. I don't know. But I really do think that an illustrator should plan and really map out what they're going to do for the best and highest impact. I want to use Drew Struzan, one of my favorite illustrators, as an example to explain the Loomis method for composition. So let's talk about Drew. Drew had such an amazing career, was the best poster artist ever, in my opinion. And of course, that dovetailed with the rise of all kinds of great pop culture movies from Spielberg and Lucas and all the above. So look no further than Struzan for that career in poster art that is just amazing and fun to see. But I think part of his success isn't just his technique. I mean, his technique was amazing. His ability to capture a likeness is unmatched, but also the way he composed his pictures. He really has a solid underlying understanding of how to compose a picture. So let's take a look and break it down. So Loomis has a handful of compositional strategies, and we'll see if we can find them in Struzan's artwork. First, a very strong and powerful composition is a triangle or a pyramid, something where everything is stacked in a progressive way so that you have kind of a solid shape that holds and contains the artistic information. And what it does is it just makes a very settled picture. It has a strong base and foundation, and then all of the interesting information is displayed in an organized way stacked on top. So it's a very powerful and strong way to compose your pictures. In fact, it's probably super common when it comes to, action and other oriented images. Circle or an oval, as Loomis would describe it, but I'd also call it the golden ratio, where you kind of organize and structure your picture based on these mathematical relationships. So if we look at something like this, where you can kind of see that conical shape inside the composition, where your eye can follow this path and travel through the picture, following that visual element, but also it's a way of subdividing the space into these perfect mathematical forms. Now, frankly, I don't understand the geometry, I don't understand the math, but I know it looks good. A diagonal or counterbalanced composition. This is really good for creating something that looks really either asymmetrical or symmetrically balanced. And you can see what I mean by this example. So there is that diagonal line that kind of runs through the picture, but you see also a balance between something that's, let's say in this poster, dark, as in the smaller area of the picture, plus the lighter, brighter, and bigger area of Harrison Ford's face. Those two elements are counterbalanced. So they're, if you think of a scale, they're counterbalanced that way. That doesn't make it, positive or negative. It's just that's a way of balancing the imagery so it feels structured, like they feel connected. L or a T shape. It's kind of like creating a target. Look at this one. Jack Burton. The check's in the mail. That's an obscure reference nobody will probably get. But anyways, look at the way that main figure, it just sits on that target line, but also it kind of divides the page a little bit. And so it's natural that he would put that figure right in the middle. Kurt Russell's right in the middle, kind of standing out arms stretched, but then it balances the bottom two-thirds of the picture against uh, that bright blue at the top third. And then just look at how Kurt Russell's head kind of breaks the frame. I just love stuff like that. So targeting can work, but you want to balance it or counterbalance it with that, light and dark or cool and warm, which you see here, the cool blue, the warm red, oranges down at the bottom. In fact, that's something I want to mention. Some of these compositional strategies can be combined. So I'm not trying to say that you can only use one or the other. It's just that part of your job as an illustrator is to experiment and to find the optimum one to tell the story you want to tell. Inverted triangle. So it's kind of the opposite of the pyramid. This is kind of a catch basin, where the angle of the artwork kind of points down toward a central figure. So it kind of makes sense that in this case, little Anakin is down at the bottom of the picture and the weight of the world is kind of aiming back down toward him. And then the looming Darth Maul in the background, looking over his shoulder. Whereas in another pose, like that Harry Potter, everything was kind of pointing up to Harry Potter. In this case, everything's kind of pointing down to little Anakin. And visually, that tells the story that this character is central to the movie, and he's still kind of innocent and tiny, and so we get that feeling visually, as opposed to him being the largest, most dynamic person in the picture. He's kind of small and overshadowed by everything else. Now, that visual storytelling is something that's subliminal, but it works. But it also serves an advertising purpose. I mean, Liam Neeson's your star, and so he's up there big. Natalie Portman, Ewan McGregor at the bottom. Of course, we have to include Jar Jar. He's there. But yeah, that dynamic kind of V-shaped composition can really help direct the eye and create a focal point. The S-curve or a rhythmic composition. Well, this implies motion and movement. So let's see how that works. One of my favorite posters growing up was the Goonies poster. Loved seeing that, that dangling path of Goonies trying to hang on to the stalagmites or stalactites. I don't know which one's which. But anyways, that curve, that S curve kind of, I think creates the motion and, the drama here of the Goonies trying to hold on and not, lose their footing, but lose their hold or whatever. So yeah, that implies and pushes motion into the picture in a way that you really can't do with a solid, pyramid shape, which might make it all seem settled. But this one obviously makes them feel like they're falling. Mass shapes or light versus dark. You can only imagine what example I'm going to show here. Of course, the literal light versus dark, right? You have this large, dramatic, high contrast, black and red Darth Vader up at the top, that dark, dark area, competing with that bright light of the fight down at the bottom with Luke and Darth Vader. So you have that extreme size relationship, but also, we've masked one side against the other, light versus dark. And that little bright spot where maybe Luke can make a difference, maybe not. That final showdown in Revenge of the Jedi, actually, Return of the Jedi. Foreground, middle ground, background staging. Okay, so this is the kind of composition that for me can work with a few things. It could work with a landscape or kind of a scene where you're trying to show things in the front and the back, but also it can be used with a montage or a collage, which Drew Struzan does a lot, where he plays around with foreground and background, not just in the literal scene, but also just placing different elements in the poster. So you have smaller objects in the front, larger objects in the back, something looming in the distance, something close to the front, those palm fronds, those details, short round. Then in the background, you have that evil temple and the man and the burning heart. Such a cool, cool image. But anyways, playing around with that foreground and background tells the story, but also kind of subjugates different things to others. So ultimately, we have, Indiana Jones looking right back at Mola Ram and kind of thinking about what's coming or maybe what happened. And then it's interesting to have, you know, um, Willie and Short Round kind of looking at us, but then also in the background, You've got indie fighting and the flames and the fire and so on, and they all kind of blend together. But playing around with that foreground and background really helps make that image come together in a unique and interesting way. It makes it feel very dynamic. Leading lines and directional flow. So this is something where you play around with a focal point and try to get somebody's attention on a critical thing. Thing. The thing, right? Everything points back to the thing. What a cool way to play around with this idea. And I think if I understand the story, if I get it right, they didn't have anything to give Drew at the time that they assigned him this movie. So there wasn't any of the crazy footage that he could use to kind of figure out what to put into the poster. And so he just came up with this. He knew it was in Antarctica, knew it was something crazy and wild, and came up with this prism of light shining out of the guy. So, what a crazy way to just kind of focus on nothing, frankly, but make it interesting at the same time. And to tell you that something dramatic is going to happen, even scary, supernatural, alien, whatever it turned out to be. But all those lines you can see just direct right back toward that point of light. So, those are some ideas, you guys, on how to use Loomis compositional strategies in your pictures for storytelling. Now, what I encourage you to do as you think about what makes my artwork special or what makes my work good is try these different strategies. If you're going to be working on an assignment, don't just pick one, pick two or three and try them and see what happens to the storytelling, see what happens to the picture. A lot of times I think we just settle for one idea and then we move on. Maybe we're kind of stuck in this little, internet doom loop where we got to get things done fast, or we're kind of lazy and we just pick one solution. Well, by looking back at these old timers and seeing how they worked, you get the idea that the more effort you put into planning your composition, the better it's going to turn out. Don't just accept the basic or the average solution. Put a little elbow grease into it and see what you can come up with. See if you can come up with something special. All right. So, especially when thinking about confronting AI and what's happening with, especially with our digital art, do we want the computer to make those decisions for us? Or do we have a process and a way of thinking that is going to help us make the important decisions, right? I think that's part of what these techniques will help us do. They'll help you think. And the more you can think, the better you are. All right. Have fun.